Yes, so I'm actually kind of interested in the retreat with Tucker.
Oh, it was great. It was really good. So it was him and Upali. Upali is a he was a student of Tucker's, and now they teach together sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, so Tucker is on the West Coast, and Upali is in Tennessee somewhere. The retreat was really good. It so it was like 9 days or something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly. I mean, they say 10 days, but it's not really 10 days because the first day is only like past
Never
eight
mind about the
o'clock.
details. It's,
All
all
right.
retreats are like that.
Anyway,
So, how is his teaching?
it was really good. So he had a Dhamma talk most nights. However, I didn't go to all of them because at some point I was getting so deep into kind of samadhi that I just wanted to keep going with that instead of going because it's optional. The Dhamma talks are optional. So he doesn't
Mhm.
care if you go or not. The only thing they care about is you have an interview every couple of days, and they do care that you go to the interviews. But I think that's mostly to make sure that you're doing okay, because some people have issues on retreat. So,
Boy, don't
um,
they ever. That's the whole point of having a retreat for the very beginner is to let's get our life cluttered out of the way. No
yeah,
books, no telephone, no laptops, and now you have to deal with that crazy place called your own mind.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so in a sense, it was really informal because, yeah, he didn't care. Basically, like he just made sure that he was checking in every couple of days to make sure that you weren't having any problem. So yeah, the teaching was great. It was mostly just question and answer, and a lot of people asked. So it wasn't really prepared talks actually. It was just question and answer. But it was actually some people asked some really interesting questions, so that was cool. Um, so yeah, I mean the atmosphere was cool too. The whole setup was like it's really beautiful in the desert, so that was really neat. Um, And then, yeah, the interviews themselves were very helpful. So, because he teaches mostly like the mind illuminated style. He's got a background in other things, but he tends to teach along that style. And the idea is, you start mostly with concentration stuff, and then when you reach enough stability, then you go to more kind of vipassana style stuff. I mean, it's similar to stuff that we've talked about in the past. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so I've been able to get on that retreat, and then when I went on the private retreat a couple weeks ago, um, yeah, like really stable attention compared to what I've ever been able to get before. And so I've been doing a lot of kind of just investigating my mind kind of stuff, just kind of like looking around. So I've gotten to the point. Well, I mean, not currently, but when I was in those situations, without a few days in, I was able to get to the point where, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really get distractions anymore. Thoughts would come up, but they would never pull me away at all. Uh, so when that started happening, I started just kind of looking into my mind, uh, and it was really cool. And uh, I saw the way it worked in a way I've never seen before, which was really amazing. Like one thought kind of triggering another thought, kind of triggering an emotion, but I could just kind of step back and watch the process without getting involved in any of it. And it was, I mean, it's hard to describe. It was really cool though. It was really neat. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean, I definitely got some realizations that followed me off of those retreats. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It was really good, and I think I'm going to try to just figure a way to do kind of maybe like a weekend retreat every month or something like that, because I think
Okay.
I'm reaching a certain, because when I can get, I mean, you call it fit for work, when I can get my mind in that to that level, it's, I mean, I can understand things much more clearly than I can normally, just because I don't spend my time chasing thoughts. I'm just like, it's just so clear and so still.
Hmm.
So
At one time, you had mentioned about obsessive compulsive or compulsive behavior. What do you think about that now? Do you feel like that you're much more in the present moment rather than getting stuck in a compulsive way of doing things?
uh, I do. There's, so what I've noticed about that is that, well, I can only speak for before these two retreats, because before these two retreats, when I've had gaps in practice, in other words, if I don't meditate for a few days in a row, for example,
Hmm.
there's definitely some return of some of those habits. Um, that said, yes, that's 100% true. So, like, definitely a part of it is entirely just to do with practicing, attention basically on my breath, and so that's definitely the case. However, I'll say this, and this is actually something I don't know the answer to yet, because that retreat, I got done with it, I said 2 weeks ago. It's probably 1 week actually. Like a week and a few days. uh it There's a couple habits that dropped after that, and I'm kind of waiting for them to come back as my samadhi or concentration goes away. But I'm not sure they. There's a couple of them that I feel like I just kind of saw through them, and they're not going to. But I don't know. I mean, it's a little experiment. We'll see. I'll let you know. But I
That
didn't
often
expect.
is the case. Um, there was a time, I think that it was possibly around 1995, that I remember raising my hand the way that my dad would raise his hand to me. Now, I see that from time to time with people with kids, but that time when I raised my hand, I recognized at that moment I had become my dad.
Hmm.
And I have not raised my hand since then. That was 25 years ago or something.
Hmm.
But before that, it would be clear. I mean, I remember clearly that I was doing it, but one time I saw it. I really saw
Yeah,
it.
that's what I mean. The thing is, I don't want to get my hopes up about anything, but it is the case that just I had a couple of these kind of like insights or whatever, seeing things play out in my head and just how they played out, and like there's a couple, like I remember there's a few just weird things. Like I remember at one point, I remember seeing like a visual thought, like a picture, or like an image or something like that. At the
Hmm.
same time, I heard like an auditory thing on completely different topics. They weren't even related, and it was just like, whoa, this is the way my head works when I'm like there's just stuff going on all over the place that don't even
Hmm.
necessarily link up with one another. And it's like, oh, this is happening. And then there's some part of my head sees that and it makes this other thing happen. And it's just like this kind of causation thing.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Freud had an actual term for it. He called it free association. Goenka has a term for it, but it's not original with Goenka. It goes back centuries, and that is monkey mind.
But what I'm talking about, it wasn't monkey mind in the sense that I wasn't getting dragged away at all. I was just kind of watching it, completely like not a part of the action, just kind of.
Okay,
I
so
was
now the
aware.
monkey at least was staying in the same tree.
Yeah.
But you can
So
see that. You can begin to see that random thought process, as well as getting stuck on a particular issue.
yeah, but like it wasn't really getting stuck. It was just kind of. It wasn't really
Have you
get.
noticed
It
that
wasn't.
sometimes it gets stuck, or are you beyond that now?
So it definitely 99, almost all the time it gets stuck on things. But no, when I was in these kind of states, it wasn't getting stuck at all.
Oh, I hear what you're talking about. All right, so you're talking about when you're actually um, clear enough to really see deeply what's
That,
going right.
yeah, I'm talking about the things that I think may have kind of stopped some of my stuff in a way that isn't dependent on me practicing every day. It seems like I could kind of see these things play out in my head, but I mean, but there was no energy to them. They were just kind of like I was aware of them. Like I wasn't drawn in. I was just kind of like, oh, there seems to be a sound, but I wouldn't even know or care what the sound was. There's like an awareness, like, oh, there's some activity going on here, or like, oh, there's a picture of a shoe that just came up. Huh, that's funny. But it wouldn't be like a memory or anything really big. It would just be kind of like just my mind just doing stuff, but I wasn't getting drawn away by it at all.
Right. Would you call then the images were more like a flash, almost like an image that would flash and then there would be a residue, but the image was very quick.
So
So
I think that's absolutely what was going on. However, my perception of it wasn't that. My perception was there would be like maybe like an image that would then morph into another image. Like maybe it would be like a car to drive down the street and then it would be somebody driving with it or something. But then when I started investigating more, I actually do think there were flashes of image and my mind was just interpolating between the flashes. Like there's a little image here. And then my mind is just kind of like, it made it drive this car down the road or something like that. Even though I don't know if those. I don't think there were actually a bunch of images in my head. I think it was actually flashes. Because then I tried to investigate. Then I kind of want to see like exactly how long is this particular image there, and it was instantaneous. Like once I kind of burrowed down on the image, it was gone as soon as I realized it. But
that's
then
what
I
I'm
was thinking,
getting at. Exactly. That's what
but
I'm getting at. That
but
they
but when I wasn't burrowing down, it had like I think exactly like what you're saying. I think it was like a residue. It's like when something splashes in the water, there's like ripples. I feel like it was like that, and then there was other images being projected, but not the same image. They were conceptually the same, but it was just kind of like it was something. It was my head playing things out basically. And the way that it felt like this was like an object, but then it was really a bunch of different objects if I actually like looked at
okay.
it. But each
Great.
one just not lasting for longer than like a millisecond or something.
All right. That's excellent. Now the next thing that you would uh, intentionally work on is rather than allowing that stuff to come up while you're watching it, because now that you're paying very close attention to it, now we want to start directing it so that you have intentions as to what you're going to be thinking about, and that there's only one small criteria, and that is this a wholesome thought or is it an unwholesome thought? That's the only criteria, but we need to investigate what that means in the sense that you're only going to start allowing the mind to have wholesome thoughts as opposed to, let us call them junk thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts that really don't mean anything, but because they have the scattered and scattering quality to it, that the thoughts will lead to something that evokes an emotion or a feeling that is often out of the past. And so we start to direct the mind, and we're going to direct it towards what we would call wholesome things, knowing that the most wholesome things is what's happening right now in the sensual awareness rather than in the mental awareness. I'm hearing a bit of an echo.
Is it a new echo?
You just started a couple of minutes ago or so.
Is it present right now?
No, I don't hear it right now.
It may have been the way I was holding my phone. Maybe the sound was bouncing back off my hand or something.
All right. So, continuing on with this, basically what it sounds like that they call it, and this is not actually out of the sutras, this is later stuff, but they call it access concentration, which could also be considered pre-jhana.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you start to gather the jhana factors together, one of the ways of doing the jhana factor is by directing the thought. You're going to apply the thoughts to something, and that you're going to keep the thoughts on that. And that according then to the Buddha, the very, very best thing that one can apply and sustain the mind on, in the sense of uh, wise attentiveness or wise attention, is to pay attention to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path in this very moment of practice. So it's not a philosophical Four Noble Truths, it's the direct, right now, how am I applying the Four Noble Truths? And so it's really good to begin to see how the mind works like this on its own. But we're going to start, now that we can do that, we're actually going to start directing it. Go ahead.
There's another thing that I realized that was pretty cool. It has to do with dependent origination or dependent arising.
Yes.
Yeah, so like I saw that play out really clearly, and it felt different than how I thought, how I conceptualized craving working. It was a lot more discreet. So like people would say something like, "Oh, I've been hungry all day," for instance. That's something that somebody might say. But really, it doesn't seem like you're hungry all day. What it seems like is you get these just different little cycles that come up, like that you get like contact, right? But until then, are you hungry? I mean, who knows? It's
When
kind
you're
of a
not
moot
paying
question.
attention to being hungry, no, you're not hungry. You're only
Exactly.
hungry when you are thinking about or having the feeling that you're recognizing the sensation of hunger.
Yeah,
So
because
when
I
you're
got
thinking
this.
about food and the mouth starts to water, or you're thinking
Exactly.
about your stomach and it's growling or it's asking for to be filled, that's hunger. But you're not hungry all day. No one has that kind of concentration.
Yeah,
They
yeah, I
could.
know
They could
exactly.
put it on the breath, and now they can get someplace.
Yeah, so I started to kind of explore that a bit, and it was just like funny how kind of discreet these things were. Like you're not at like a baseline level of hunger all day long. It's either present or it's not present. And if it's present, it's somewhere going along this little link in this little, you know.
Hmm?
So like that was really cool because I could see it kind of play out, and I would know like, oh, it's gotten a craving, and then I could kind of see it, kind of like I then kind of know because it was about like, for instance, one of the things I got this really good yogurt in the refrigerator at this little like retreat thing I was at this little cabin I was in, and yeah, I mean like, and then if I ever grabbed for it or wanted to go, like that didn't come from nowhere. That was a whole little cycle of things. And then if you say like,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna sit down, I'm not going to do it. It'll go away. You're not hungry anymore. You don't want it anymore. And then it comes back. And then, but it's so discreet how that worked. And that was like a really interesting kind of insight into, because I mean, we've talked obviously about this stuff, but seeing it that clearly about like, yeah, it's conceptualizing it, saying like, oh, I was hungry. Like, no, there were like a couple little pings of things that went down a little thing, and then it kind of fulfilled this process. But
Right.
anyway, I saw that.
Flashes of hunger, just like flashes of visualizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, they happen sometimes very quickly, but then we begin to attach to them, and that's what makes them linger.
Mm-hmm.
Almost as if they were saying a mantra, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just let that flash of sensation or feeling or thought pass by.
Yeah.
So, having kind the first thing I want to do is let's discuss the jhana factors so that you got what we're doing, because you're kind of resting in a pre-jhana state. And the
Okay.
reason that I say that is because you haven't been mentioning that you've been experiencing some of the jhana factors.
Oh, so there's things that, so like, I was filled with a lot of joy, like overwhelmingly, like just laughing. That happened, and like I there was like a 20-minute period in which I was probably happier than I've ever been in my life, and that happened about a week and a half ago. And it was just like this, just incredible. I've had PT before, like I get it regularly, and when I'm at that level, I can get it basically when I want it. But this was like a little different. This was a little, I don't know how to describe it. I'll describe it the way that I can think of how to describe it, which was that it was different because it was sustained for about 20 minutes. And it was different because it was less energetic than they normally are. I'll get involuntary movement sometimes. I'll get I'll sometimes like rock, and these kind of things happen sometimes, but this was more calm than that. But it was more enjoyable than that. I don't know how to describe it. It can't, but it came from one. Do you want to? It's kind of funny when it came up. It came up. I got this visualization in my head. You know who Richard Simmons is?
Mm-hmm.
Of him, I he was roller skating, and then he threw up into the air little like blue sparkles that then became stars. And then for like 20 minutes, and my eyes were closed, and they're just these blue dots basically that were just kind of like pulsing. And then I just got overwhelmed with joy and just started laughing for 20 minutes. It only happened once. It happened like 4 days in, but it was crazy.
Well, first off, to make sure, that was just an event that had a certain set of factors to it. Don't get attached to that and try to recreate it. That there's a whole lot more that's going to happen, and that the joy and the happiness kind of settles into a deep satisfaction. A
Mm-hmm.
kind of satisfaction that you could say it like this. In the sutras, it talks about having the job well done. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when I heard about that, I was thinking about the job that's to be well done is to practice the Dhamma that is set out, by a certain teacher, and that's the job that's well done. But I've read a sutta recently where it had a different emphasis, and that is that it's not the job that you were given that you're getting good at doing. but it's the job that you choose to do. And this is actually quite important, though it's exactly the same job, but now this is my choice. This is my job because I choose to do this job rather than because I'm following orders. So then we come to this station of having a job well done, which means basically getting ourselves into a state that's enjoyable, that we get into a state of satisfaction. We do it intentionally. That's the job to be done, is to get ourselves into a state of satisfaction. There will be times when piti is higher or lower, but that what we're looking for is equanimity that comes about through satisfaction, which is another way of just saying, just cool it, just cooling it. And that this is actually a better way of looking at nibbana rather than something highfalutin or magical or out of this world or whatever like that. That it really just means to chill or to cool or to be really satisfied, let us say, with the traffic that's passing by. And you're looking at it like that in the sense of here the traffic that's passing by is the contents of the mind. But now we're going to, with that same passivity, watch the traffic as it flows, but now we have a kind of an easy way of controlling the traffic because we're going to focus down on let's not have junk thoughts, but let's have really wholesome thoughts instead. In the sense of we can look at it from the framework of the 7 factors of enlightenment with the investigation. All right, so now we're investigating. How is my sati? How is the mind? What's the mind doing? These are the kind of thoughts that we have directly with the experience of the 4 Noble Truths. Is this suffering? Is this not suffering? Now that we know the way that the mind is working, we can begin to control the way that the mind is working. And the first thing that we're going to do is take control over the thoughts to begin to manage them. An example of this would be like being a bouncer at a bar. That the one job of the head bouncer is to stand in front of the bar to make sure that the people who are getting into the bar are up to your specifications. Are they dressed well? Do they have an invitation? Whatever the criteria is. But then at other times, the bouncer actually has to go. Now it's echo again.
Okay.
And
it should be better now.
When there are some occasions when the bouncer has to go into the bar because somebody's gotten rowdy and throw him out. And so we're going to actually be able to do that with the mind in 2 ways then. One is that we're going to guard the mind for what kind of thoughts that we're going to allow in, or if we have caught the mind wandering away, then we're going to throw that thought out and come back in with a more wholesome thought. So that we're going to start guarding our thoughts so that we can think what we want to think rather than thinking what this free association has always been there. Okay, so this is in First Jhana is what is called applied and sustained thought. We can apply it to the wholesome as sustain it on the wholesome while we're watching the breath. But now we don't have to put so much effort into the breath other than watching it, that we know enough about the breath to know that it's an in-breath or an out-breath. We know enough about the breath to know that is this a long, good breath, or is this a typical shutdown breath that humans have. And so by paying attention to the breath and making sure that it's a long, deep breath, that um, that's enough. But now the job becomes to guard the mind based upon what's happening in the present moment. That we spend much more time in the here now with the mind, rather than letting it wander around and inspect it that way. We're actually going to start intentionally having the thoughts directed. Now, you would ask me, well, what is wholesome and what is not wholesome? The answer to that is up to you for your investigation and inspection, because it's your job that you're going to be doing well. That the satisfaction is the job well done, because now I can decide for myself what is wholesome and what is not wholesome. But the general idea is that it fits within the context of the teaching of the Buddha, within the context of the Four Noble Truths. So specifically, we can start monitoring or asking ourselves questions. How is my effort? Has effort actually become energetic? Has the effort become so right that it's just darn right easy? Because you've had that experience also.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you were talking about, is being really happy, was because that happiness was downright easy. It was
Mm-hmm.
almost giving you a push.
Yeah.
An example of that would be on well, just jumping up in the air, the physical body. Jumping up in the air is hard to do. But anyone can jump onto a pogo stick, and now that extra springiness that the pogo stick has, allows you to capture some of the energy on the downstroke, so that you can reuse that energy through the spring to go back up. And so on the pogo, it's actually a whole lot easier then to keep jumping.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have other instruments. I've seen them actually as for amputees, that there is a device that has a long curve on it that's actually quite springy, so that he can actually run with this thing. Okay,
Yeah,
you
I've
know what I'm
seen
talking
those.
about. All right. So imagine then that you have that kind of device on your feet anyway, so that every step that you took was like a bouncy, springy step. Or another way of looking at it is like walking on the moon with 1/6 gravity.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're actually meaning about what the effort, or the mind's effort, becomes. It becomes springy.
Yeah.
And so therefore it becomes almost effortless. And that in the description of the seven factors of enlightenment, they almost there's many of them will translate it as actually as energy. So one's right effort, when it is unremitting, it's almost like we don't have to jump up and down anymore with our yippee ki that we've got this pogo stick that really helps that springiness.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, so this is the thing to do, is to look at, well, how's my effort? Is my effort actually effortless now? Does it have a bounce to it or a springiness in it, so it keeps bringing me easily back? All I have to have is just a little bit of stop, and
Yeah,
bang,
that
I'm there.
yeah, that's how I would describe it. Um, yeah, it was like I didn't have to put any effort into it at all. It was just kind of automatically happening, basically.
Yes, so that's the kind of stuff to monitor with each breath, to keep track of this. How is my sati? How is my investigation? And in fact, when I'm asking the question, how is my investigation, I'm investigating the investigator, or investigating
Mm-hmm.
the investigation itself. Um, so this is the way to begin to decide what's wholesome, what's useful, what kind of thoughts are worthy, and which kind of thoughts are junk thoughts. Because the junk thoughts are the ones that are most likely going to take us away from the breath, rather than keeping us on the breath. And so this is what we mean by applied and directed thought. So when we have that happiness, that joy, that satisfaction, and now we're applying the mind in a way so that we can sustain that satisfaction because we're guarding the mind and then guarding the feelings, that state can be maintained when you get up off the cushion. Or when you're sitting down on a chair, you can bring yourself into that state, which was what we had talked about before. So this is a good time now for you to re-establish yourself in those two techniques. Of one is sitting down on the chair, and the other one is getting up out of the chair. When you're doing that throughout the day, whether you're at work or whether you're the chair you're sitting in and getting out of may in fact be on an airplane, maybe an airline seat. Doesn't matter, but whatever seat it is that you're sitting in or getting up out of, we want to make sure that with that effortlessness that you've learned to practice while on the cushion, you can bring that to bring yourself into a state of joy simply because you remember it, and the chair is the trigger to help you remember it, so that you can bring yourself to that state of joy over and over and over again throughout the day, and then work with sustaining it for just a little while by making sure that only thoughts are going to be wholesome thoughts, not junk thoughts.
Yeah, I've gotten pretty good at the mindfulness during the day. I very rarely lose my self in thoughts for longer than like 10 seconds or something like that. Yeah, no, I mean, largely because of our talking, I think I've put a lot more consideration into daily non-sitting stuff, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like I said, usually like when I start seeing thoughts coming, I can recognize it pretty quickly, and then I can kind of diffuse the situation and not go with them, basically. So that's pretty cool.
Excellent, excellent. Let me check up with you on one other thing that we had talked about before, and that was that you were recognizing that you were bringing up tension in the shoulders when you were talking with people,
Yeah.
and that you would walk away from a conversation all stressed out.
Yeah.
How is that going for you now?
Um, it's going well overall. I'll say though that at some point it came back, but then it went away again. I think it's related to my mindfulness. No,
Really?
yeah, no, but I mean, what I mean to say is that if I don't meditate for a few days, um, I think it comes back because my mindfulness gets lazy. I think that's because basically there's some it's um it's it's still a new habit or still stopping an old habit, and so I have to be on guard for it or else it'll happen. But generally speaking, yeah, like today that didn't happen at all today. um I talked even in a kind of tense conversation and it didn't happen at all. So as long as I'm
And
on
how
guard
is your
about it.
breathing during that? Yeah, that's the important thing, is being on guard, watching your breath while you're talking with people,
Yeah.
listening to what they have to say rather than feeling like you're on the spot to perform.
Yeah. No, I had a fairly heated conversation about 3 weeks ago. I won't get into details as it's being videoed, but yeah, I was definitely on my breath, and it helped a lot. Let's just say I might not have a job otherwise, so it ended up well. It ended up well. Um, what's up?
That's great. That's really great, Dan. I really appreciate you calling and checking in with this. So that's the advice for the day. Is now that you're actually quite capable of seeing right into the mind, you can also recognize now you can make some real choices about what you're going to think about, what's worthy of your time and thought. Now, one of the ways of misunderstanding what I'm saying is to think about things that are important, because that's how people normally spend their time. They want to think about what's important to think about, what's meaningful for them to think about, which is another way of thinking about what terrifies them. An example is the politics that just recently an Iranian general was taken out, and that helped for a short time um, bring all of the Iranians together in unity or solidarity, especially around the hatred of the United States. That's not going to last. People are going to go back to their old selfishness, but for the moment, that funeral was important to everybody. That in fact, at one point, there was even a stampede in the city where he was born. I don't remember much of the details other than there were a whole lot more Iranians killed by their own stupidity and their own feelings of that this death was important. And so we often make the mistake about what's important versus what's wholesome. That generally, generally what it means is that when we're thinking about important things, that we're not thinking wholesome things. that so begin to watch that. What is it that you think is important? Because it's generally not.
Yeah.
And that what's important generally has to do with how we feel. And so we can begin to look at that. So when you recognize that you're thinking about something important, think about or look at closely, how do you feel right now? What's in the body? What's the breathing doing? Etc. like that. And then you can recognize, wait a minute, that was important only because it had meaning in a particular context.
Yeah.
And that meaning really is very fluid.
Yeah.
That in fact, when people get into serious spiritual practice, and when I say spiritual, I'm using the word spirit in the sense of breathing in the air, that even the word, here's an interesting side point. At one time, I thought that the word atom, which means not cuttable in Greek, had to do with ata and anatta in the Pali. But I've come to find out that no, the word atom, not cuttable, or the atom that we have as the basis of the molecules, is actually coming from the 4th century BC at the time of the Buddha, that the actual word is not atom, A-T-O-M, it's A-T-M-O, that gives us the word atmosphere. Atmos, or atma, is the actual word for the word spirit or spiritual, or wrongly seen to be a soul or something permanent, where in fact the atmos, or the surrounding atmosphere that we're in, the total one, is actually in constant flux. So when people begin to work on the spiritual world, they tend to get the idea that things are not as important as they used to be, because importancy always has to do with consistency and permanency, where in fact everything is in flux. And so keeping track of that flux then is going to be more wholesome, but tending to things that are important then tends to be unwholesome. So when people then go to the point in their spiritual life that begin to see that things that I used to think are important are not important, then we start to deal with really deep questions like, what's the meaning of life? The answer is, you got to make your own meaning, because inherently there is no meaning to life. It just is. To where with religions, they normally give a great deal of meaning. Like a God means something.
Yeah.
Or the story of the religion means something. And so when we recognize that life really doesn't have any meaning at all, and because it doesn't, our job then is to take our own meaning out of things and just enjoy it. So as those thoughts begin to pass by in the mind, we recognize that they're not important.
Yeah.
They're just junk thoughts. That's all they are. And why would I spend time with junk thoughts in my mind when I could have really good, valuable, wholesome thoughts in the mind instead?
Yeah.
And so when you begin to think of something important, recognize, hey, wait a minute. But there are some things that have to be dealt with, some important things. And that importancy then would have to do with the basic four requisites, whereby below that we'll actually experience suffering, and we know it. And so basically our job is to find out what our bottom line is and then just stay above that. An example of that is the Thai visa, that if I did not go and get the visa, then I would be causing trouble. It's important to go get the visa. I recognize it's important, but it's not important enough to worry about. I used to worry about visas, but now I don't worry about it anymore. I know exactly what needs to be done, and we go get that done, and then it's out of the mind. And by the way, it's Monday that we go over to Koh Samui. We promised Kitty that she could spend the night in a hotel, and because she's 7 years old, In fact, she's all over the place, and she's very excited to go back to Koh Samui in the next few days. So these are things that we recognize. Yeah, there are things that are important, but they're not worth spending time on. That what's worthy of our time is the enjoyment of the moment. But there are some things that are important, like, for instance, your job. That's important to you. Recognize that that's important to you, because that's one of the ways of letting go of it, is when you recognize how important that job is, then you can let go of it. In the sense of letting go of the visa does not mean that I'm not going to go get the visa. That job has to be done. But the important job is, can I enjoy getting the visa?
Yeah.
Can I enjoy the time that it takes and all of the effort and whatnot like that? Have I learned over the years? Have I gained any wisdom at all about how to do a visa? And so this is the way to begin to look at it: is what's important. What's important has to be taken care of, but what's important is not so important that it's worth having unwholesome thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm.
To stay in the state of where you can maintain wholesome thoughts rather than junk thoughts. An example of that was years ago, I would plan in advance for that visa. And when I say plan, that means the mind goes on, and I get worried, and there's nothing to worry about. There has never been a time that I have gone to the visa office and not gotten the visa.
Mm-hmm.
And so why should I keep worrying about it? And yet visas are so important that people worry about it as if it were some sort of PhD qualifying exam or something, rather than just know you've got to take the right paperwork. And that's all they care about, is making sure that they've got the right paperwork.
Yeah.
which, by the way, for me winds up being about 30 pages or maybe 20 something. I haven't actually counted them.
Oof.
You got to go to the hospital and get a medical certificate. You got to go to the landlord and get the papers from that. You got to show a map that's got the coordinates of the longitude and latitude. You got to have a hand-drawn map showing where you live so that you're not making stuff up. You have to have every page of your bank book. Plus, you have to have a letter from the bank stating that your account's in good shape. And then you also have to have another paper from the bank showing the bank balance for the past 3 months. But those items that I'm listing, they've been there for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know what they are. And so I've actually got a thumb drive. And all we have to do is take that thumb drive down to the to the internet shop and have all that stuff printed out. That's all there is to it. So why spend any time thinking about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're beginning to understand what I'm talking about. You can apply that whole concept of all it takes to get the visa, and recognize, yeah, it's important. It's got to be done, but it's not important enough to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have thought. Let's spend our time with wholesome thoughts instead.
Yeah. Makes sense.
All right. So that's the way to change your practice now, just subtly, is that you're going to now be on guard. That you can use that access concentration point or that first jhana then to guard the mind to maintain your state of satisfaction. That a visa or a trip to the DWI or any of that kind of stuff is not worthy of pulling you into bad feelings about it.
Yeah.
Or if you go for a job interview or something like that, it's not worth thinking about.
Yeah.
When you get into that interview and they ask you questions, you can answer them. You don't have to you don't have to bone up.
Yeah.
So this is a way now of changing your practice just slightly, is to emphasize that your job for yourself is to figure out what's worth the thinking about, what's worthy of your thought.
Yeah.
Every breath, what's this thought? What's this breath's thought? What's worthy of thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any questions about that?
No, seems, I mean, no, seems pretty straightforward.
Excellent, excellent. Somewhere that's buried in that book you mentioned, The Mind Illuminated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we've talked before about that book. I still really like it, but it's clear that there's some gaps in it. And one of the big gaps in it, in my opinion, is yeah, a couple of things aren't emphasized that much, and one is attitude. It is talked about at the beginning, like when you come back to the breath, don't get angry at yourself, be grateful and be happy and stuff. But it's not really hammered that much throughout the book. And that is something that yeah, it's been helpful for me. That yeah, like when meditation isn't going as easy as it could be. You know what?
Well,
But
that's my job. I see my job as not a teacher. I'm a cheerleader.
yeah. No, and the other thing is that the book doesn't talk about mind daily practices that much. They do have one practice in the appendix, but anyway, I'm getting off into a tangent. But yeah, no, I know what you're talking about though, and yeah, I mean, it seems like a good mindfulness practice in a way. you know.
All right. Well, don't be a stranger. Don't let it be a couple of months next time when you call. We can check in and say hi.
Yeah.
And it's really good that you're getting some other students involved with Juan and um, Robin.
Yeah.
So that's really great. Yes, let's spread the Dhamma. You can spread your joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, Dan. Well, we'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.